Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop and another part in the video series where I show you how I make one of my guitars. In the previous videos I've been preparing the neck and it's ready up until the point it's time to start thinking about inlays. Usually I do my tulip inlay on the 12th fret, but especially for this video series I wanted to do something special and I thought why not do a dragon inlay. So I spent some time behind the computer, designed a new inlay, and now it's time to cut it out of a piece of aluminum sheet and let's see how it looks. So let's get to it. So before I get started, as usual, please leave a comment in the comment section down below with your thoughts on this video series thus far. Yeah, hit that like button if you like these videos and subscribe to my channel if you already haven't. Yeah, with that out of the way, let's get started. So I've printed the design a couple of times on a sheet of paper. It's a 1:1 scale, so they should match up with the final dimensions. So first off, let's cut one out, and I'm going to create a sticker to be put on a piece of aluminium. It doesn't have to be that precise, just a rough outline. So here we have it, our dragon. Piece of aluminum or aluminium, depends. I put on a couple of pieces of masking tape because I've noticed that the super glue tends to glue a lot better on the masking tape than it does directly on the aluminium. Some super glue, spread it out a bit with a toothpick and just stick it on. Let this sit for a couple of moments. To cut out the inlay, I'm going to use just a jeweler saw with a selection of different blades, and make sure if you select your blades for your jeweler saw that they're suitable to cut metals, aluminum, plastics and such. Don't use the blades that are supposed to be used on woods. They won't cut the aluminium as good, and they tend to break a lot more. I usually can do an inlay like this with 1 or 2 blades, so we should be fine. Yeah, let's get to it. I'll start with a coarser blade just to cut out the rough outlines and then do the details with a much finer blade. Yeah. And as you can see, although this is a 2mm thick sheet of aluminum, you can cut it rather quick. And this is a fairly coarse saw blade. Alright, here we have it. The roughly cut out shape. Now it's time to use files, sandpaper to clean up all the edges. Oh, and I have to find a way to do the eye. I found a very small drill bit that should fit exactly in the widest part of the eye, and then I'm going to use the smallest blade I have to just widen up and give shape to the eye. So fingers crossed, this will work. Alright, we've got a hole. And let's see if this very small blade fits. Just right. now it's time to use some very small files to get it to the final shape and tidy up all the edges. This job might actually take the longest to do, so I'm going to speed things up and make some cuts here and there and show you when I'm done. Alright, just a quick little tip on how I go about in sanding all these tight corners and the inside, for example, of the wings. I'm going to take a piece of linen backed sandpaper. I'm going to rip off just a little strip, real tiny strip, and put it in my jeweler saw. Let's see. Nothing fancy. It's 400 grit, so very fine sandpaper. And this stuff tears off fairly easy. Come on. Nice strip of sandpaper. Now I can sand the inside, in this case, of the wings, and I hope you can see it. It gets straight all the way into the end without any problems. Yeah, doing inlays, it doesn't matter if it's a one-piece aluminum one like this or a multi-piece mother of pearl one. Yeah, it just takes patience and time. I think I will spend at least a couple of hours, so at least the entire evening, to getting this absolutely perfect. So it's almost like as if it's cut by a laser or something. So yeah, I'll come back to you when I'm done to show you the end result. Yeah, there she is, all cleaned up. Took me a couple of hours of fine sanding, polishing and such. But yeah, now she's ready to be inlaid into the neck. Now that I've got my aluminum inlay cut out and ready to go, before I can do the actual inlay into the fretboard, I always put in the radius on the fretboard first. That's because my inlay is only 2 millimeters thick. And I know that with a 12-inch radius, that's what I'm going to put into this fretboard, I'm going to lose about 2 mils on the side. So there's always a chance that I sand through my inlay if I put it in first. The downside when doing it like this is that you have to inlay into a curved surface. It makes routing a bit more tricky. And I'm going to use my ultra long radius sanding beam. I've made this a couple of videos ago and there should be a link somewhere around here, or maybe here, somewhere in one of these corners, I don't know exactly. So yeah, let me set up, put some sandpaper on this massive radius sanding beam, and let's try it out for the first time. So to keep track of what I'm doing while radiusing this fretboard, use a white pencil and just cross mark the entire fretboard. almost there. And like so many things with guitar building, patience, patience, patience. Yeah, let me finish this off and I come back to you when I'm done. Okay, with the fretboard prepared, so the radius is in, it's all nice and level and flat. What is it? Is it level or is it nice and flat, straight? It's hard for me. English is not my native language, as you can probably have heard. Now it's time to finally do the drag and inlay. So I'm going to clean up the shop a bit and I'll see you for the fun part of doing an inlay. So yeah, here we go. It's a bit of a weird angle and I hope you don't mind. The tripod is really here on the work, standing on the workbench. Yeah, when I laid out this workshop, I didn't intend to making any YouTube videos. Otherwise I would have taken possible camera positions into mind. So maybe one day when I'm going to reorganize and redo the entire workshop, it will have overhead mounts and such for the camera. And at the moment I have only one camera, so I have to change it and set up the tripod, set up lighting. A real hassle. Maybe in the next workshop I'll keep these things in mind and have nice overhead mounts. But for now, this will have to do. I've marked out all the frets, and this right here is the 12th fret. I've got my dragon, which I can position. And what I like to do, because our dragon is, well, almost exactly like the drawing, I can cut one of these silhouettes out, stick it to the fretboard, use a scalpel knife, scalpel blade to trace the design, and use a little Dremel to start routing. But first let's find the center of the fretboard. Of course using the trusty protector. Oh, my battery, the camera is empty, so let me change the batteries. So I really hope this gives you a better view on what I'm doing, although it's very awkward for me because I have to look at the screen and it's upside down and I can't see if it's aligned properly, but we'll be fine, I hope. I went ahead and I prepared a couple of things. Of course, we've drawn in the center line of the entire neck and the center of the 12th fret position. The dragon is based on a circle. It's a 44mm circle. So I've taken my compass, drawn in the circle. This gives me a good idea of how to place and where to place my inlay. So because it's very hard to determine the center on your inlay. Now I can position it the way I want. It's going to be something like this. The downside of doing inlays, of course, in the fretboard is that you have to take into account where the frets are going to cross your inlay. So I've cut out another logo design from the stencil we made, and I've already drawn in some fret positions, so the 11th and the 12th fret, and of course the center line of the logo, so I can position the logo exactly the way I want. It should be end up something like this. What I'm going to do next is the same as I did with the aluminum cutout. I'm going to use masking tape to mask off my neck, stick this logo to it using the trusty old super glue, let it sit for a while, and then start routing by using a Dremel. Yeah, this Dremel bass, it's homemade, I made it myself. Of course, there's a very well-known American company making these precision router basses. Proxon makes them. But yeah, if you are attempting to make a guitar, you could also make one of these basses yourself, I think. So let's get going. I'm sticking my masking tape parallel and on the center line of the 12th fret position, so I can use the seam as my new center line. Of course, redraw the center line for the neck. This might be a bit boring because I'm making absolutely sure I'm putting this in the correct position and not that it's going to end up off center or something. Yeah, so after a couple of minutes of fiddling around with the logo, I'm quite happy on its position. I'm going to stick it into place using a piece of masking tape. Now I can double check again. I will never be able to do one of those building time challenges, build a guitar in 6-7 hours. It takes me 6-7 hours only to position the inlay. Yeah, this should be it. Of course, my tulip inlay, the one I do usually, takes far less time because I know exactly how to position that one and what looks good and what not. And that's also almost a symmetrical design. The outlines are almost symmetrical. There's a very clear center line. Yeah, this is something completely different, but yeah, it's not bad to have a challenge once in a while. Super glue time. Stick it into place, and then as soon as it's into place, we're committed to it. So here we go. Nope. Toothpicks. Luthier's best friend. Is it even called a toothpick? I know the Dutch name is very different. It's a cocktail stick, but I don't know. Now I'm going to use a scalpel blade to trace along the outline of the dragon. You could trace along the inlay itself. For example, if you don't have your design printed out like I did. But I think you can't really get into these tiny, very tight corners, even although I have a very pointy and very sharp scalpel blade. And this being aluminum, if I trace 2 lines, 3 lines, it gets dulled real quick because it's such a fine, sharp edge. It dulls real quickly when stroking it, even against the aluminium. So I'm going to trace the paper design first and use the aluminum as a template where necessary. So yeah, let me set up the camera for a different shot. After tracing the outline of the inlay, I remove the inside, and this gives me a clear view of what needs to be routed. And I can also do a pre-fit of the actual inlay, and if there are spots along the outline that are, for example, too tight, I can now adjust if needed. I can trace the aluminum if needed. So, cleaned it up, accentuated some of the outlines, some more directly into the wood, and now I'm ready to get my Dremel and start routing. Alright, here I have my Dremel with the homemade precision routing base I made myself. And another modification I did to my Dremel, it's connected to a foot switch. And yeah, just for better control. I don't like if I have to go into, while routing, have to search this switch to turn it on and off. Just a little foot switch, yeah, it makes it so much easier. I can have my hands on the router at all times. I've set it to the correct depth already, and I'm going to try to use the smallest router bit I could find. It's not really intended, I think, for this use, but it's very small. It's, I think, 0.6 millimeters diameter bit for Dremel. So yeah, I'm going to try and to route the outline first, and then use a bigger bit, yeah, to remove most of the material. So let's see how this goes. Maybe I have to change my glasses for magnifiers. Let's see how this goes. Yeah, it's very dark. Yeah, I really am going to need some magnifiers, and maybe my stool, because this requires a lot of concentration. The great benefit of having one of these, yeah, silly looking magnifier helmets, or I don't know what it's called officially. It has a light on it, so now I can actually see what I'm doing. Let's go. I couldn't give you a better camera angle of the routing itself, but it's just, yeah, keeping the edge of the router bit to your lines, and you should be fine. Now I've got the majority of the inlay done. I hope you can see, so the majority is done. And now I can start fine-tuning it using scalpels, small chisels, the Dremel router, yeah, to really make it fit. This is the first rough pass. It doesn't fit quite yet, but yeah, that's why we need to fine tune. So I cleaned up the edges somewhat, and now I've got a reasonable fit. As you can see, it almost fits. So now it's time to remove the sticker, because now the papers and the fuzziness on the edges is starting to hinder me to see what I need to do. But I think we're almost ready to glue in the inlay. Clean up the bottom somewhat, and then we should be ready to go. People always ask me why I keep such long thumbnails. It's not only for playing guitar, because I rarely play anymore. It has to do with removing masking tape, to be honest. So now here we have our inlay. I hope the camera picks it up. And now I can clearly see the marks left by the initial outline trace with the scalpel. I need to clean up the bottom some more and do a test fit, and then we're ready to glue it in. And once again, I'm not an expert. This is just a hobby for me. I don't have the decades of experience, and these are just the methods that I use. I know there must be guys out there way better. There must be. I know there are guys way better than me at doing this stuff. But yeah, I just want to show you how you, as an amateur luthier with minimum tools and limited budget, can do great guitars. And we've got an empty battery. I have to change it once again. A couple of spots left to do. Yeah, I'll get back to you when it fits and we're ready to glue it in. Alright, there are some new batteries in the camera. I've cleaned the entire inlay recess, and let's see, it should fit. Yeah, I can push it in somewhat so it fits in nicely. Let's try and take it out again. So it's time to glue it in place. And I've got two types of super glue. One thicker, it's a high viscosity, and a very, very low viscosity one. I'm going to glue it in with the high viscosity super glue first. And then remember our bag of dust we collected while radius sanding our fretboard. And I'm going to use the dust to fill in any gaps within the inlay. When there are still gaps after gluing it in, I'm going to use the very, very water thin super glue to fill in the rest of the gaps that might be still there. So here we go. I can't redo this shot, so going to fill in the entire cavity. Super glue, just flood it. Oh. I'm using my left hand, that's stupid. Can you tell I'm a bit nervous? I'm shaking. All the way into the end. Use a toothpick again. Spread the glue into all the nooks and crannies. Alright, here we go. Don't stick myself to the fretboard, preferably. And I'm going to use just a scrap piece of wood and a hammer. Just to gently tap it in. That's a great thing of using aluminium. It bends a little. Right. At this point, I'm going to spread some dust. All over the inlay. Use a little brush to spread it out somewhat. And tap it in some more. I don't know how it comes across on camera, but I'm really lightly tapping it and just letting the hammer drop on its own weight almost. If you have to really force it in, then your cavity is too tight. So it's in. Don't reuse this dust because there's all kinds of contamination in it now. So I can see there's still a little gap here, the eye probably, yeah. So I'm going to use the thinner super glue and some more dust to fill in the gaps. Let's see if we can get you any closer. Here we go. Focus. Hopefully it will. Super glue. Is that in? Yeah. And tap it in without gluing yourselves to the fretboard, of course. And keep repeating this process until all the gaps are filled. Alright, we might need to do some other spot repairs later on. After we filed it and sanded it down to be level with the fretboard. Again, I don't use accelerator on this process. It's when you apply dust, it's not really necessary. And I found that sometimes when you use an accelerator to accelerate the curing time on the super glue, it can turn the super glue white. It gets real hot and it turns white. And that's not something I want for my inlay. Of course, the spots repaired with this trick, with using dust and super glue, they usually turn out a bit darker than the original wood color. Yeah, that's logical, of course. So the glue has set. Only really takes a couple of seconds. It's why we call it in Dutch, it's called second glue, not super glue, but second glue, because it cures in seconds. And now we can use a file, just a regular metal file, to file down the inlay to be flush with the fretboard. But be very careful not to scratch your fretboard too much. Although we still need to sand the fretboards some more, we don't want to end up with huge scratches made by your file. So yeah, keep filing, then switch over to a finer file, sandpaper, etc. until it's flush. I'm going to do it right now and I'll see you when it's done. Yeah, the last step is to gently, very carefully sand down the inlay until it's real flush with the rest of the neck, but be very careful not to go and sand in a dip in the rest of your neck. The best way is to use a leveling beam with very fine sandpaper, much finer than needed, and just to check if there's any change in resistance or going over your neck without actually sanding down the neck, but just check for resistance. If the inlay is still protruding on some spots, you will notice resistance on your leveling beam. But as you can see, there's almost no change. There's just a little spot here, but this means now my inlay is nice and flat with the surface of my neck, and when I go over it with my hands, I can't feel the difference between the neck and the inlay. And this is what it looks like right now. I think this is the best job you can do without a CNC machine, by hand. It's in real tight, you can hardly see any repairs or any mistakes, so good job. For you it has been only a couple of seconds since the last clip, since I finished the dragon inlay, but for me it has been a couple of days now, and I have a confession to make. This weekend I was trying some design ideas for the fret position marker inlays. I didn't want to go with my usual just dots, just round dots. So I was practicing some wire inlays and I came up with a diamond shape. And yeah, I got a bit carried away. I finished the fretboard. I'm sorry, I know. I was supposed to show you as much as possible in this video series, but I didn't have the camera set up at the time, and I was working and I was trying different things, and let's try one, and then I go shoot some footage of it, and before I knew it, I was done. The only thing left to do is now fine sand the fretboard, and then we have an almost complete neck. One of the last things I do before I put in the frets is make sure my fretboard is, of course, nice and level and as smooth as possible. And to achieve it, after doing the inlays and doing the rough sanding on the radius sanding beam, I take a couple of sanding beams with various grids of sandpaper attached to them. So 60 grit, 120, 240, 320 grit sandpaper. And I mark out the neck crosswise, like I did previously. Check if the neck is somewhat straight. Perfect. I took great care while sanding in the radius to keep it as straight as possible, so level as possible, so shouldn't be much work to fine sand and level the fretboard. I'm going to do it right here, so hopefully you can see it. So I've marked out the fretboard, and I've already did the rough passes, so I only have to do a very light pass with 320 grit sandpaper, but usually you go through the grids doing the same exact thing for each grid. Now, because we have the same radius, it's not a compound radius, so we've got the same radius at the nut as we do at the back of the bottom of the neck. We have to keep our leveling beams as parallel to the center line as possible, and just gently sand along the entire length of the fretboard. And you should see your pencil mark fade with each pass. Keep making the strokes in one direction over and over again until your pencil marks are gone. And keep your radius in mind. Don't sand at the center line all the time. I usually start next to the center line and go to one side with each pass, so shift over my sanding beam a little for each pass, and then go to the other side and do the same thing. So start at the center line, next to the center line, do one pass, move it over just slightly, do another pass, do another pass, and again on the other side, 1, 2, 3. And as you can see, this is 320 grit, 380. Nope, 320 grit sandpaper, and it took me just a couple of passes, and all my pencil marks are gone. And now I know for sure my neck is dead straight. Away with the sanding beams. Next step before fretting is going to sand it some more, or this is not really sanding, this is more polishing the fretboard to high gloss, as high as I can get it. Starting with, of course, 400 grit sandpaper, and I'm going up to the grits, probably to 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1500, 2000. So I'm going to sand it up all the way up to 2000 grit. So yeah, here we go. And again, before I start, try to avoid sanding too long in one spot, because otherwise, even although it's very fine sandpaper, you still can create a little bit of a hump or a bow. Sometimes it helps to use a sanding block. Yeah, just a quick little tip. This whole series is turning in one great large tutorial anyway, so why not a quick little tip? When sanding your fretboard or polishing it, try not to round over your edges too much. I've noticed when you round them over, when you're going to do the fret work, when inserting the frets, you don't have a nice even radius anymore, because at the edges it will dip, and you the chances are you get frets that keep coming out of the edges. So what I like to do is I like to keep these edges as sharp as possible, and when the fret work is done, then I go in and round over the edges of the fretboard to give the guitar a much better feeling. It plays so much better with nicely rounded over edges, but don't do it before you've put your frets in. 800 grit sandpaper, by the way. Here's our nice and shiny fretboard, complete with the inlays, and it's probably the last time it is this shiny, even without any oil applied. And this is also where I'm going to leave it for this episode. It's turned out to be a very long episode, but oh so fun to make. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, please leave a like, leave a comment in the comment section down below with your thoughts on this video series. Yeah, subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss out on any of my uploads. Yeah, and I hope to see you in the next video where I'm going to install all the frets into this neck. I hope to see you there, but until then, have a nice week.